Thank you for joining us today. My name is Nina Farrell. I am the manager of events for the City College of New York Alumni Association. I'm going to give you a little background about the Alumni Association and then just introduce you to our guests today. The Alumni Association of the City College of New York is a nonprofit organization that works on behalf of the City College graduates, supporting the efforts of the college as well as current students. This organization is over 170 years old and membership based. We were founded by the first graduating class in 1983, and we just seek to establish beneficial relationships between the City College and its alumni, while also supporting and promoting meaningful connections amongst alumni, students, faculty, and staff. We have over 10 chapters and 15 affiliate groups. And I believe today we are getting support for this event. It's co-sponsored through the psychology department here at City College of New York, at the City College of New York. And for more information, you can just check out our website, which is at ccnyalumni.org, one word. We also have social media accounts, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn, which I will share in the chat later on. Everyone on this event is muted so that you can listen to and hear from our esteemed guests. And we have some, we have an option for Q&A in the end. So for Q&A, you can just put your questions in the Q&A section if you haven't already sent some to the email that we noted in the invitation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the authors for this evening that are joining us this evening: Sue Harris, Janet Mays, and David Singer. And they're going to speak to this very interesting topic and book they've written. Oh my goodness, I cannot find the title, but I'm just going to hand it over to Sue.
Okay. Thank you, Nina.
You're welcome.
And thank you to the CCNY Psychology Department and the CCNY Alumni Association, David Covington and Peter Goodman, for allowing us to present our book to the CCNY students and alumni. We're grateful to Jasper Mislak also, our editor at Rowman and Littlefield, Lexington Books, and Nancy Rosenfeld, our agent, for getting us through the process of publishing our book, no mean task. I also want to give a shout out and thank you to everybody who's watching. I'm really glad you could make it, and I hope you find it interesting. As we go through this reading, if you have any questions, I think Nina already said that, please put them in the box at the bottom of your screen marked Q&A. And questions we don't get to will be answered on our website, www.interpersonaltheory.com. And now I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Here it is. Okay. Yeah, this is the name of the book is Interpersonal Psychoanalytic Theory for the 21st Century, Evolving Self. I just want to add that the term interpersonal was coined by Harry Stock Sullivan in the first half of the 20th century. And it's important that we stand on his shoulders. We also dedicate our book launch to our co-author, Marilyn Miller, 1939 to 220, who passed before we could find an agent and a publisher. Evolving Self is also dedicated to our cherished validators, Joan Harvey, Ralph Klein, and Jane Pierce. Interpersonal psychoanalytic theory assumes that people can achieve insight into how, in their interactions with people, they become who they are, and how they can change patterns of living that impede need fulfillment. People are born with a blueprint for growth and development that includes self-respect, self-fulfillment, expansion of experiences, and ever-widening and deepening human interactions. It's similar to a seedling, which possesses the potential for growing into a flourishing tree. The dominant orientation of psychiatry, unfortunately, and most related mental health professions is that, with some exceptions, most problems in living, like depression, psychoses, attention deficits, etc., are based in aberrations which can be addressed with medication or short-term therapy. And that's why we wrote Evolving Self. That orientation is closely tied to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM, which classifies mental disorders via a listing of symptomatology. And unless diagnoses can be presented within DSM criteria, issues such as an unhappy marriage, an unsatisfying career, poor grades, or despair about one's capacity for intimacy are often not covered by insurance. Now, they show here a picture of Sullivan's book, The Fusion of Psychiatry and Social Science. He actually lectured on, and his students put into print 4 more books and a full-blown theory, which includes a basic formulation: we are all much more simply human than otherwise. And I think that's an important basic principle. Fusing his theory of human development with the socioeconomic climate of his time, Sullivan wrote about race, war, and poverty in 20th century terms. The fusion is even more urgent now as the world faces ever-increasing oppression and devastating international conflict. And paralleling these developments, the mental health field focuses less on human need and more on solutions based on corporate profit and behavioral conformity. Evolving Self was written against the current backdrop of psychiatric perspectives devoted to, quote, curing. These include short-term quick fixes designed to be consistent with evidence-based criteria, and focusing on narrow, measurable indices, such as number of positive or negative interactions. The approach usually omits the broader context of a person's life. For changes to be long-lasting, people must understand symptoms in the context of their historical interpersonal development and incorporate strategies to mitigate them. The American Psychological Association's standard of successful treatment is to bring a person back to, quote, functioning within normal limits, whatever they are, which is considered the actual clinical benefit. But besides obvious difficulties in defining normal, the orientation is superficial. It's constrained by an arbitrary definition of mental health plaguing psychology, and other social sciences. Rather than return to normal functioning, mental health is really an open-ended process of continual personality growth. Evolving Self is written for practitioners in all areas of mental health and pedagogy, whether or not they can explore a person's deep interpersonal history or engage in comprehensive interpersonal interventions within the constraints of their work. We hope that our book not only supports and enhances the resurrection of interpersonal perspectives, but also opens new research topics within scientific and academic communities. Although it's not intended as a self-help book, we did hone our prose so lay people could make use of it. It's for people interested in understanding themselves and other people. And finally, this volume also addresses some pressing issues relevant to interpersonal theory and practice in the 21st century social, economic, and political milieu. Now I want to talk about the structure of the book. And I just wanted to add one thing that I may not have mentioned. That is that Sullivan focused on relationships between people, which is what is observable and also key in understanding human beings, primarily the relationships between them. The first part of the book, Basic Concepts, lays out the assumptions for the book. The second part, the Developmental Eras section, shows how growth takes place in successive stages involving interactive experiences with people. And the next section, Personality and How It Works, includes cognitive development and learning, consciousness and dissociation, despair versus the pressure of need, and the role of envy. The next section, 4, specifically addresses psychotherapy, including dream analysis. And by the way, practical applications and short case illustrations are used throughout the book. The 5th section, the last one, is issues, and it brings the theory into the larger socio-political sphere, including how interpersonal theory relates to the development of society. So, Chapter 1, Basic Concepts. Interpersonal, as I said before, is what goes on between people. Human beings develop sequentially by living and learning in interaction with other human beings. Unless there are extraneous catastrophes, human development and developmental anomalies are tied to interactions with significant people, particularly in the formative years, approximately the first 10. In addition to central significant relationships, broader social phenomena like racism, classism, religious oppression, and anti-LGBTQIA+ oppression, political and economic crises are also interpersonal and profoundly impact the growing person. However, people always have the capacity to change in an interpersonal environment. Now we come to the concept of the self system. That is, one's sense of self at any particular moment. It has productive and restrictive characteristics, and it's available to grow from experience or to ward off growth from experience by omission or distortion. It has both functions. The self system is the part of the personality that organizes and focuses awareness. If it could be frozen in time, It would contain what a person has available to consciousness, the awareness of what one can do and who one believes oneself to be in relation to oneself, other people, and the world. The self system governs the ability to focus attention in order to do anything at all. However, this same capacity to focus attention is also affected by a second function, the self system's restrictive apparatus, which uses selective inattention to avoid awareness of anything that disrupts the historical emotional connection with the central parenting figures. The next concept is tenderness. In general, tenderness involves empathically sharing with another to satisfy any need at any time and in any era of development. But this kind of interaction is most potent in the formative years, and particularly in infancy. All caretakers usually have out-of-awareness limitations based on their own upbringing. When the infant, in its newness and staggering potential, collides unknowingly with those limitations, it empathically experiences parental discomfort. And the infant empathically picks up the adult's mood and continuity with the caretaker's tenderness, and then continuity is disrupted. Since the infant is dependent on the continuity of loving relatedness with the parenting ones for 1, survival, 2, the ability to function, and 3, tenderness, the disconnection from that relatedness is experienced as a threat to all 3 needs. Now we get to the concept of the central paranoia or despair. Despair is a compilation of one's worst fears. It includes the fear of death, the fear of disorganization, and the dissociation of the need for tenderness. Usually, it's a symbolic statement of why the project of learning something new can't work, or why one can't grow. One fears one will be dead, crazy, or alone if they continue to grow. Ironically, this is a formulation people experience most powerfully at the point at which they're in danger of growing beyond what was conceivable to the primary caretakers. To grow beyond the primary self systems of those caretakers would threaten very early continuity with them. For example, nightmares very often occur during periods of crisis and change in a person's life, when they've reached some kind of turning point toward growth beyond what was conceivable to those who brought them up. Nightmares are symbolic statements of despair. They're useful tools in therapy because they congeal or codify despairing assumptions that a person lives with all the time. Assumptions that the person is often not even aware of, or only marginally. I'll give you a case example. Okay, Alex, a young woman in therapy who had managed to extricate herself from an oppressive home situation and had moved into an almost equally oppressive marriage, had a nightmare as she was contemplating her dilemma. A giant hammer was descending from the sky to crush her. She ran to the other side of the world, and there too, another hammer came down to crush her. She woke screaming and brought the dream to her therapist, who suggested that she believed her parents were all powerful and could follow her anywhere. Her despair was that she could never escape her fate, no matter where she turned. This cold-blooded look at her own despair was a relief to her, actually, freeing her to set about planning for a divorce and a job. The dissociated consists of all needs and perceptions, including memories, and partly organized functions that have been exiled from awareness because of the forbidding gestures of early significant others. The dissociated is not a system. It's not organized in any way. It's a repository of forbidden needs and a chaotic constellation of amputated experiences that could not be validated. Dissociated needs and experiences are drawn upon by the integral personality, and I'll tell you about that in the next slide, in order of urgency of need and emerging opportunity for satisfaction. Now we come to my favorite concept, the integral personality. It's the total of all aspects of experience, dissociated and in awareness. All experience a person has is contained in the integral personality. It's called integral because it integrates everything, the self-system, the central paranoia, and the dissociated, which all relate to the integral personality in a particular way, as you can see from this diagram. It's seen as integrating all experiences, those dissociated as well as those in awareness. The integral personality is motivated by the press of need and moves a person to find ways to begin to satisfy that need. It incorporates all experience, hopeful as well as despairing. Because needs press for satisfaction, the integral personality focuses on one's most pressing needs and how they're being blocked in order to organize ways to break through the security system. In the individual, it's the integral personality that pushes a person to move, sometimes unwittingly, in the direction of potential satisfaction of need, even when that need is dissociated. The integral personality also exposes the individual's restrictive, despairing assumptions and the myriad ways the person limits their own functioning. The exposure can be through dreams, rumination, or the unconscious push to be in situations that make one's limitations obvious. A person finding oneself placed in the uncomfortable position of having one's limitations exposed can choose to use the opportunity or run from it. And now we get to chapter 14, and my colleague, Janet Mays, will continue, and I'm going to stop sharing this. I want to introduce Janet Mays, my co-author.
Hi, thank you, Sue. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so I'm going to talk about interpersonal theory and psychotherapy. So according to Sullivan, one achieves mental health to the extent that one becomes aware of one's interpersonal relations. No matter why a person initiates therapy, their therapist becomes a particularly safe and positive audience for growth, aligning with their integral personality, where unmet needs push for recognition. The therapeutic relationship, therefore, is a very significant primary integration in the person's life. While different from others in its organization into discrete sessions, without social interaction in between, it's nevertheless a loving relationship. The therapeutic relationship establishes a positive audience, that is, the therapist is a positive audience, validating ever-expanding and deepening primary and near-primary integrations. So as a person goes through life, their self-system is impacted by their integral personality's push for change and their central paranoia's effort to maintain the status quo, both vying for influence over the self-system. It was as if there were two voices competing to be heard over one phone line. And here's that dynamic, the integral personality vying with the central paranoia's maintenance of the status quo. By the time the voices reach the self system, some sort of compromise may occur so that the self system can handle, without too much reorganization, the dissociated needs pushing for change. How much compromise, which voice is more dominant when all is said and done, determines how much the integral personality has succeeded in moving the need into awareness in the self system, as opposed to how much the central paranoia has mustered the self system security apparatus to weaken, to lose, partially or entirely, this round of struggle. So here comes new learning into the self system. If the self system's protective wall of security apparatus has been breached, the self system can become unraveled while it struggles to reorganize itself to either partially or fully accept the new learning, or to shove it all back out of awareness to await another opportunity. This unraveling is experienced as anxiety, including disorganization plus some form of dread. And that was and Sullivan's and our definition of anxiety. And in our book, we make a very important distinction between anxiety and stress. As one evolves, experiences of upheaval continue to occur periodically. The ancillary goal of therapy, therefore, is to become accustomed to anxiety, not fear it, and increasingly familiar with the person's own style of self-limitation to avoid it. They learn that weathering that anxiety storm without drowning can, in increments, improve their quality of life. Usually, once a person understands the process, upheavals are expected and temporary, experienced less painfully, and with less dread. The very act of going over one's own history, which is what goes on in therapy, particularly in the beginning, but also throughout the therapeutic process, brings up dissociated needs that can then push for acceptance into the self system. The person can get in touch with unsatisfied needs and what they need to do to get them satisfied. Another advantage of going over various misfortunes in their upbringing is that they can understand current problems in the context of their developmental interpersonal history. Not because they have a hereditary defect. They begin to realize, for example, that they were not born with a propensity, say, for self-debasement, but that they grew up in an interpersonal environment in which their primary caretakers abased them. There's no such thing as a self-debasement gene. With the therapist's assistance, perhaps through an understated but pointed comment, the person is more able to hear that their lowly self-image was trained or programmed, and what was learned can be unlearned. What was not learned can be learned. They're not stuck with their low self-esteem. So this is a very hopeful way of understanding human development and conducting therapy. And in addition, it's important to say that in the therapeutic process, blame is not part of the equation. We're not talking about blaming anybody. Everybody all of us were brought up by people, and those people were brought up by people. So we're really ending up talking about effect on the person, not blaming anybody. The other, of course, part of that is that a person is born into a socioeconomic circumstance that also has an effect. Now we come to the essential interpersonal context of learning. Functions are operations that satisfy needs. Learning is the process of developing functions, requiring validation in its initiation and progression. Validation is a very important word in interpersonal theory. The quality of validation determines a function's proficiency to satisfy a need. Expanding the roster of validators. When the earliest primary caretakers approves others, siblings and extended family members, grandparents, close friends, godparents, babysitters, the infant incorporates to varying degrees of comfort whatever that small circle of important people validates. If the primary caretaker can validate comfort with people beyond this relatively small interpersonal circle, we call it the charmed circle, in the child's very early life, the roster of important validators increases. Even more learning can occur. The self system expands. To the extent the original loved ones enjoy other adults and children, the child enjoys them too. When they start school, they will be able to accept more validators. To the extent the primary caretaker is isolated, suffers from social anxiety, they can't effectively validate expansion of the child's roster of validators. It becomes a real struggle. Accepting peer and adult validators beyond the immediate nuclear or extended family when the child enters school is really crucial to expanding the roster and therefore crucial to learning skills beyond those earlier validated. The bottom line, learning requires a positive or somewhat positive audience of significance to the learner. Beyond that first small circle of significant others, the child requires other sponsors who are at least partially acceptable to the people who are already important to the individual. And now we come to academic learning in particular. Validation required for comfortable and successful learning must occur way before the child's first day of school. In addition, they need to feel somewhat comfortable spending extended periods of time outside the purview of their significant parenting ones, and to be somewhat comfortable with peers and alternate adult authority figures, and witness how many kids and parents are completely bent out of shape that first day of school. They also must have some confidence that learning new skills is possible. A toddler, for example, whose exploration of their environment evokes, "No, don't touch that," because of poor toddler proofing, may be fearful exploring nursery school blocks. A child dutifully trained to never touch things belonging to others may have difficulty playing with nursery school toys. New schools, new learning experiences, therefore, can be fraught with apprehension. Sexism, classism, and racism. Now we come to the larger interpersonal sphere. Students are potentially influenced by attitudes of teachers and guidance counselors towards gender, class, and race. In addition, the availability of role models is really essential. Other biased attitudes at home, in the community, and school can also adversely affect how people learn and what they aspire to, including those who are silently or overtly LGBTQIA+. Furthermore, people learn at different rates and in different ways. Their skills might be overlooked if they are, for example, poor test takers or have disabilities. Parenting ones, teachers, and administrators must validate all under their charge. During enslavement in the United States, it was dangerous, if not lethal, for enslaved people to learn how to read. Now, classism and racism, but primarily racism, are responsible for excruciatingly substandard housing, houselessness, and woefully underfunded schools, severely compromising successful academic learning. When social conditions change for the better, overall academic learning tends to improve. Even in this country, if a person does overcome strenuous odds and succeeds academically, opportunities for well-paying jobs or for jobs at all are increasingly limited. This topic is beyond the scope of our book, except to say that more people are managing to develop political perspectives, harnessing their intelligence, not necessarily and not always expanded through traditional schooling, to push past the current society's limitations. And now we come to the SEEK program, which started at CCNY. I was a full-time faculty member in the English department. I think I joined the faculty in the third semester of its inception. And so I'm going to talk about how this theory helps us understand why this program succeeded and still is succeeding. The SEEK program, Search for Education, Elevation, and Knowledge, and the study group that grew out of it at the City College of New York is an example of how people pushed past those social limitations that I just mentioned. During the 1960s civil rights movement, people struggled to win more academic opportunities. The SEEK program was developed for youth whose high school averages didn't qualify them for admission to college in the ways I just described. Now, I was a co-teacher with Audre Lorde, pictured on the right here. She was also a member of the SEEK English department, a radical, a feminist, a poet, an amazing poet and essayist. And when I would pass by her office, students were overflowing into the hallways and they were just hanging on to every word. And I was the academic, the grammarian. I taught them to take what they did by working their thoughts that Audre would help them find and express so beautifully. And I would help them hone their essays so they could pass their courses that required them to have the kind of academic English that was required of them, say, in a history course. And we just put up some pictures of more recent SEEK students in their graduating day. It's still a successful program, an amazing program. The SEEK English department developed a curriculum for students in the first level pre-baccalaureate writing course that recognized the need for on-the-spot interpersonal validation. The classes were longer than usual. No one brought homework home, mainly because some home environments, particularly those that were crowded and demanding of the students' attention, were not conducive to concentrated learning. Student tutors and a teacher circulated through the class to help students with writing. They taught students to trust their thinking, to write freely first, and edit later using their classroom lessons. And I don't know when the dorm program started in the SEEK program, but that also helped immensely. Students completing this persistently validating one semester course performed significantly better on final writing exams than students who completed 2 semesters of the traditional freshman composition. Out of this paradigm came the study group, a kind of failure anonymous group for students, SEEK and non-SEEK, on academic probation. Students met in small clusters with a teacher counselor trained to run support groups. Leaders of support the study groups for students on academic probation were trained and aware of what happens to people when their self-systems are challenged. Some students become extremely anxious as the process succeeds. Individual and group counseling is required to help them understand where their anxiety is coming from. They learn to combat that undertow when things are going right, when to reduce anxiety. Remember that self-system is trying to struggle to keep the status quo and gets very anxious and then all of that. They are inclined to return to old ways. They don't need to know the technical intricacies of how the self-system operates, but they do need to understand about pushing boundaries beyond their comfort zone. Students may need to be gently guided through explorations of their childhood histories and current living situations. When the study group model was first getting off the ground, some group leaders were not aware of what can happen when the self-system is challenged too quickly. And now I'm going to talk about one of my students and what happened to him, which, because we were so green at it, we moved too quickly with him. And well, one student just about to fail out of college earned an A on a paper using validation methods described above. One day he was jubilant, having never earned higher than a D or an F. The next day, his self-system repudiated. The undertow took over. He quit college to join the army and was ultimately shipped out to Vietnam. And I don't know what happened to him, but I was devastated. We all were. We learned how urgent it was that the group leaders understand the degree of anxiety such a leap in accomplishment can cause and how to include that insight in the group work. Since quality of validation is on a continuum, the learning process is extremely complex. In addition to environmental, including natural and human-made catastrophes and physiological and genetic issues faced by people with disabilities, the interpersonal milieu contributes to the quality of learning. And there's a long list, and we could go on and on: the immediate and extended family, the school, social media, famous people, racism, wars, pandemics, human-made disasters, the list goes on and on. So, the learning and ever-changing brain is not hardwired. Given validating opportunities, late bloomers do bloom. People revisit and hone poorly consolidated skills if opportunities for alternate positive validators arrive later in life, but only to the extent that they are open to those alternate validators. And now I'm going to turn this event over to David Singer, who is going to talk about some issues in interpersonal theory and practice.
Thanks, Janet. Thanks, Sue. Thanks, Nina. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the current context of, quote, mental disorders and their treatment. So what is called mental illness has not been successfully traced to physiological or genetic causes, despite the amount of research done toward that effort. Mainstream psychiatry continues to be in a frenzy of diagnosis proliferation. Psychotropic medication enabled the behaviors associated with many disorders to become manageable on an outpatient basis and became an enormous profit source for the pharmaceutical industry. Pharmaceutical companies collude with psychiatry and insurance companies who push to drive down costs with the labor-saving inventions that pharmaceuticals offer for symptom alleviation. In the short run, the administration of medication is cheaper than psychotherapy and may sometimes assist in psychotherapy success. Often, however, it is used as a substitute and provides some people some relief, often with side effects. Medications and their dosages can be tweaked for years, sometimes until patient-doctor pairs resign themselves to controlling one or two symptoms. Sometimes the failure of a medication is attributed to the patient being misdiagnosed now that their true disease has been revealed. An unfortunate outcome of this approach is that many now refer to disorders such as bipolar, obsessive compulsive, and attention deficit as if they are inborn, genetically based. Conversations about those afflicted sometimes assume the same permanency of these disorders as astrological signs. For example, I do that because I have ADD. So it's not a real explanation of cause. It's a way out. It's an excuse. The implications of this viewpoint for treatment are enormous. Psychotropic medications may suppress some of the symptoms. The person and the physician may spend months, years, or decades trying to determine the correct diagnosis or tweaking the drugs or dosages involved. A good deal of time and money is often spent with little benefit to the patient in a search for what is supposedly the remedy for a, quote, chemical imbalance or hereditary defect. The cost may also include physical, cognitive, or emotional side effects that endure temporarily or permanently. Since the alleviation of symptoms that comprise the, quote, disease constitute enough improvement for insurance companies to deny further treatment, medication and short-term behavior therapies are promoted. As of 2006, the psychotropic medication accounted for more than half of all mental health care spending. Understanding the roots of someone's psychic torment, the interpersonal relationships that have contributed to problems and solutions, take too long for today's market-driven solutions. The notions that improvement or cure involves bringing unconscious dynamics into awareness, fulfillment of one's potential as a human being, etc., have been eclipsed by the goal of superficial behavioral adjustment to the demands of social institutions such as work, family, and school. The next topic is the political economy of psychotherapy. Insurance companies dictate which treatment modalities are reimbursed, how many appointments are needed, what drugs and dosages can be used, etc. Few people can afford to pay for psychotherapy out of pocket. This results from the rise of managed care recently, which controls access to services and keeps costs down. Medication therapy, the administration of drugs that sometimes alleviates some of the symptoms of what is assumed to be psychiatric diseases, has become the favored modality of insurance companies. These drugs only offer symptomatic relief and do not treat the underlying causes of people's problems in living. A result has been vast profits for pharmaceutical manufacturers. And pharmaceutical manufacturers work in cooperation with insurance companies and organized psychiatry to promote what's happening as I'm describing it. The rampant march of the profit-making insurance and drug corporations has been merciless in its effect upon mental health research. George Albee, a past president of the American Psychological Association, summarizes the situation. Unfortunately, in psychiatry, much that passes as research is financed by the pharmaceutical corporate giants. They pay for the research, they pay the referees who judge the research, they underwrite the cost of conferences where results are announced, and the cost of publishing the psychiatric journals where they are published. The usual freedoms of scientific inquiry are missing. The ascendant power of capital makes it a formidable opponent to human needs. The number of victims of commodification and proletarianization of everything and everyone in its path continues to rise. A renewal of truly helpful mental and physical care is tied to the success of these victims in eliminating capitalist exploitation. So we live in a complicated and troubled world. We must continue to grow despite unforeseen obstacles. Our primary aim is to encourage readers to embrace this expansive and hopeful view of human potential. And we hope that you go to the, submit comments and questions to us on the Q&A or on our website.
Okay. And let's see. We do have some questions. I wonder if we can. All right. There are a few questions on this. Let me get them. All right. First one I see, I can take. It's from Teddy, who says, "Thank you so much for this panel. I'm hoping the speakers can address the question on who is to blame for a person's problems in living, heredity or the parents." Well, I think actually Janet already talked about it, and I can simply repeat it. There is no blame in this theory. If we were to blame anybody, it'd be Adam and Eve, and that isn't their fault either. The relationships, a person is formed by their relationships, initially by the significant others, but then after that, they can change the situation. And the goal is not so much to find out who is to blame as that what functions were limited and how one can begin to explore the assumptions a person lives by and question them and maybe expand them. So in that sense, it's not a question of blame. And actually, people sometimes start to be very angry at their parents in therapy, or some do. And once they begin to satisfy their needs and get away from feeling like their parents still control them, and have an expanded view of who their close relationships are, they're no longer angry. And they don't need to be. Anyway, that's one. Let's see what else is here. Okay. Marie Kelly asks, if nightmares are scary and express a person's despair, how are they a sign of interpersonal growth? Maybe they had traumatizing things in their life or are really worried about something happening now. Who wants to take that?
I'll take a crack at it. And then people can chime in if I miss something. We devote a whole chapter in the book to dream interpretation. We'll talk about nightmares first, but dreams operate on many different levels. And that dream about the hammer is a very good example of when a person is thinking about or actually making some positive change in their lives. Their central paranoia can kick in and say, not so fast, Charlie. That's not the way things are. You're going to die if you even entertain the idea of changing the status quo. And that's manifested very often in nightmares. And it's an opportunity for the therapist to clarify what is actually frightening the patient, and debunk the assumptions that are no longer, they're just not valid in their current adult life. But the dreams also are operate in other ways. They may be symbolically taking things from the current and symbolically offering an opportunity when the patient is asked to make associations to things that have happened in their past, because they're now ready to discuss those things, and it helps them clarify what's impeding their growth in the current. Sometimes with the person who has had a trauma, they really do need to talk about it, and they're having a dream because they're saying to their therapist, I need to deal with this. So it's a communication that we need to really step up the discussion about trauma, either current or in the past.
Okay.
Lastly, I just wanted to say that the dreams can also be about a person's relationship with their therapist. We generally avoid that. Sullivan taught us that that makes a person very self-conscious if you're talking about what goes on between a patient and a therapist. You're better off talking about what goes on between people out there in the world. But sometimes a person spends a good deal of time in a dream talking about what's going on between them and their therapist. And if they've spent that much time on it, better talk about it in therapy. I don't know if I completely answered the question. It's a complicated and great question.
Let's see. Okay. One question is, there, I have to pull this down. Yeah, I knew that. Marcia asks, why isn't there a chapter on specific diagnosis? Who wants to take that? Anybody?
Well, I'll start.
Okay.
Given what we've said about diagnosis and how it's used, we don't really think that specific diagnoses mean that much. And they can be used to the detriment of growth, which is what we're interested in. Diagnoses in the DSM are clusters of symptoms. They say, you know, do you have 6 of these 10 symptoms? And that makes you a whatever it is, you know. What does that mean? It means very little except a label. It is a label that is used to be able to give a certain medication you need to have a certain diagnosis. And that's the collaboration between psychiatry and insurance companies and pharmaceuticals. But the meaning of diagnoses is illusory. And that's why we don't really go into specific diagnoses.
Mhm. Okay, David, thank you. Okay, there's one other thing. Sarah Flounders asks, since people come from so many different cultures, including child rearing practices based on those cultures, are you asserting that one theory fits all? Is the book specifically from the middle class Western point of view? That's a good one.
That's a great question.
Yeah, well, let me see if I can answer it.
Mm-hmm.
the book, the theory talks about relationships between people. And I think we can say that that's universal. Every human being, no matter where they come from, no matter what culture, develops in relation to others. And how specifically they develop with what particular behaviors is another question. I think in general, it can be applied pretty universally, but the specifics of, what particular behaviors get transmitted and what get forbidden is another story. So there are some cultures that one therapist may be thoroughly unfamiliar with, and another therapist of the same culture may understand it better. And so at the point when you're talking about concrete behaviors, you then need to have knowledge of that culture and knowledge of that, how that person is growing up. But the notion that one is affected by those that raised you can be said of anybody, no matter what, even what the family form is, because those are the people that help the person start from birth. I hope I'm answering this question right. It may mean that, there are certain people who do better with certain cultures. That's a different story. But in that sense, I think it's applicable pretty much to anyone. How therapy proceeds, what language it's in. That's something that varies from place to place. Anybody want to add to what I'm saying?
No, I think,
No,
Okay. Well, I hope I answered that question. It's a complicated one. Okay. I think, oh, there's one other thing I should say. Once again, if you have any other questions, if you go to the website interpersonaltheory.com, there's a place for questions and we can answer them there. And I guess, is there anything else I should add? Oh, they just said that. Okay. So thank you everybody for coming. And I'm so glad you did. And I hope you learned something from it. And we hope to hear from you again.
yes, thank you. Thank you, everybody. This was,
Thanks. Okay. So,
Before you leave, I'd just like to say thank you all guests for coming, for joining us. And I hope you did. This was very interesting subject, very interesting. Obviously, I did not read the book, but just to hear you all speak on such specific areas, it definitely sounds like something that's very interesting for the psych field. I've included in the chat for everyone how you can contact the authors if you want to ask any further questions or have any further comments on what they shared today. Also know that we will send you, or at least post on the recording of this event on our YouTube page for the Alumni Association of the City College of New York. We'll also I'll see if we can send it out to you all as well, depending on how big the file is. If we'll be able to send it out to all of you registered guests and participants. And for any further information about the Alumni Association, just head over to our website, www.ccnyalumni.org. There you'll find more information about the events we host, including events like this. And again, thank you for joining us, and thank you to our special guests, hosts, for initiating and executing on this event. for us.
Thank you, Nina.
Thank you, Nina, and
Thank
thank
you,
you
Nina.
all for coming and see all these wonderful faces, some people that we haven't seen in a very long time. It's so wonderful to see you all. Thank you for coming. This
Thank
was
you.
fun.
Yeah. Thank you. Nina, can you send us the Q&A section? Because I see there are a whole bunch more questions and we want those as well.
Okay,
Thank you all for coming.
thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.